When I was in college and shortly after that, the stereotype was that people did drugs to check out. The irony is that it seems as though now kids do drugs to check in. The incidence of taking cognitive enhancements like Ritalin or amphetamine on college campuses, and as many of you who are watching this video will know, is really quite common. And the question is, why is that, and does that make sense, and is this a good thing? On the one hand, you might say, well, this is great. People want to do better, they want to achieve more. But I step back from that and think about, for example, my nephews that are now aged 14 and 16. And for the last 5 or 10 years, it seems as though they've had schedules that are more complicated than mine. They're forever doing things, they're enrolled in various sports classes, there is simply no downtime. And in some ways, and perhaps this is reflecting my age, in some ways it seems as though we have become a culture that is so much on the move that there is no stopping, and that there is a desire for progress and achievement, and that this gets reflected when I look at CVs of people applying to either medical school or to graduate school. Right now people have unbelievable CVs compared to what they used to even 10 or 15 years ago. And again, one might say that this is a good thing. My question to you is, do you think this is a good thing, or do you think this is a world gone mad? And in this version of a world gone mad, one aspect of that is people will do whatever it's necessary to get ahead, which also involves taking drugs to get ahead for themselves, to do better than the next person who happens to be a few feet away from them. So some of you might be thinking, what's wrong with enhancement? If you want to better yourself, do better in school, be more pleasant to your friends and family, what's the problem? Why not just have this be openly available in the same way that you can join the gym and work out, or you can get tutors to help you with school? Why not have enhancements either to improve your cognition or help you with your mood? Why not have that openly available? Wouldn't our society be better off if this was available for everybody? So the arguments for why one might pause before taking that position are the following. First is a general issue of safety, which is we simply don't know what the long-term effects of some of these medications are in normal populations. So what are the long-term effects of things like stimulants, Adderall, or Ritalin? We have some sense of these medications, and generally they are reasonably safe, but it is worth pointing out that the FDA has placed a black box warning around these stimulants, and that warning means that this is something the FDA considers a serious issue when prescribing medications. It's just short of keeping the medications from actually being legal. And why do they have those warnings? One issue is that these medications can become addictive. It's probably a very small proportion of people that get addicted to them, but that is certainly a consideration. The other is that it can cause cardiac side effects, so people can develop abnormal arrhythmias. Again, this is not something that happens very frequently, but when it does happen, the consequences can be quite severe. So there is a safety issue. In addition to safety, one can think about possible trade-offs, and so this is not the issue is not a side effect in the general medical way of thinking about side effects, but is it the case that if you use these medicines to help you focus better, to be more productive, is there something lost in that process? One possibility, at least a theoretical possibility, is that it might have consequences on creativity. Now, we don't know if that's actually true, but it remains a possibility that when what people really need is downtime when they're not being productive, when their mind is simply open and loose to wander, that ends up becoming an important ground, an important field on which subsequent creative acts can happen. If that were the case, it is possible and conceivable that chronic long-term use of stimulants might actually inhibit creativity. So that's generally the issues of safety and cognitive trade-offs. Okay, so we talked about safety and possible side effects and cognitive trade-offs. What other things might one be concerned about? One other issue is that of distributive justice. These medications presumably will not be covered by insurance companies, although that's not clear. And it means that people with better access, with better resources, more resources, would have access to this, and people that don't would not. And you might say, well, we have plenty of examples of maldistribution of resources. So kids in the main line, for example, can take their SAT prep courses. It's probably the exception on the main line of a student who doesn't take some kind of prep courses for their college entrance exams, whereas kids in North Philadelphia are considered a success if they even graduate high school. And that is true that in our culture, the notion of fairness is not something that we, in practice, give a lot of weight to. But despite that, I'm not sure that it makes sense to add to the maldistribution by having medications that would be, if they're helpful, be disproportionately available to those that actually need the least amount of help. What other things might you consider when thinking about whether widespread use or availability of these medications makes sense? Another issue is the possibility of coercion. So most people think, why shouldn't I be free to use these kinds of medications? The other side of that is the question of why shouldn't you be free not to use such medications? And it might be conceivable that under certain circumstances that if you're applying for a job, your employer says, look, we want you to be maximally productive, and so we would require you, or at least create an incentive structure under which you would be encouraged to use these medications. We do this somewhat in the military, which is where probably the use of enhancements in people without any kind of disease is more common than in any other domain. And there the argument is that restricting civil liberties for people under certain circumstances benefits, provides a greater good for a larger society. And the question is, could that happen in other domains as well? And you can probably imagine situations where this might be the case. So, for example, I work in a hospital. Medical students and residents are often sleep deprived. Should we require them to take medications like modafinil that may mitigate some of the effects of sleep deprivation on vigilance and decision making and so on and so forth? And you can probably come up with other examples. And the final one is an issue of character, which is most people think that a certain amount of struggle is important in the development of character. And at what point, if you can ease the burdens of struggle, either through cognitive enhancements or through the regulation of your own mood, is there a long-term consequence of that? Do we then become, for example, less empathetic if we minimize the kind of psychological pain that we might experience? And where does that stop? So, again, many people, and it appears to be that people that are younger, there was a survey done with Nature magazine about a year and a half ago, people under the age of 35 tend to be more open, tend to be more willing to think of these kinds of medications as study aids, as something that you can just take when you need it, and that there's not much harm in it. I bring up these concerns, these four concerns, just to give you some pause to think about whether there might be other implications of widespread use of these kinds of enhancement medications.